Jessa Langley didn't see him coming literally. One second she was skating backward, laughing at her own clumsy footwork, and the next, she collided chest first with a wall of muscle wrapped in a thick black coat. Her balance disappeared instantly, and her arms flailed. She braced herself for impact with the ice, but a strong hand yanked her up before she could fall. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she blurted, her cheeks already burning. The man she'd crashed into steadied her easily, his gloved hands firm on her waist. "You okay?" His voice was low and smooth, and when she looked up, her breath caught. He was ridiculously attractive. Tall, chiseled, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples and a sharp jawline dusted with the kind of stubble that belonged in a winter fragrance ad. His eyes were gray, unreadable but focused entirely on her. "I didn't mean to." Jessa stepped back too fast and nearly slipped again. He caught her elbow. "You're fine. You just have a dangerous left turn," he said, a small grin teasing one corner of his mouth. She let out a nervous laugh. "I was trying to teach myself how to spin. Clearly, I'm not very good." "Clearly," he said, but not unkindly. She wasn't sure if she should be offended or charmed. It was hard to decide when her heart was still racing, partly from the near fall and partly from the way his hand lingered a second longer than necessary before he let go. "Thanks for not letting me faceplant." "Anytime," he replied. "Though I usually charge for skating rescues." She arched a brow. "Oh yeah, what's the going rate?" "Hot chocolate. Extra whipped cream. Wow, highway robbery," he chuckled, and it was warm and unpretentious. "I'm Dean Thatcher, Jessa Langley, and I'm just here to embarrass myself in front of strangers." "Well, you picked the right rink," he said. "Everyone here's terrible." She laughed, and for the first time in days it felt good, not forced, not polite, just good. They skated a few more laps, Dean sticking close but not too close, offering tips here and there, making her laugh with sarcastic commentary on the overconfident teenagers nearby. She liked that he didn't try too hard. He didn't ask too many questions or try to impress her. He just skated, talked. Made her feel like she wasn't invisible for once. After an hour, her legs were aching and her fingers numb. "I should head out before my toes fall off," she said, wobbling toward the exit. Dean followed her. "You live around here, just a few blocks away." "I walk when it's not freezing." He paused, then reached into his coat pocket. "You sure you're okay walking alone?" "I've got a mean right hook," she joked. Dean didn't laugh. Instead, he pulled out a sleek black card and held it out to her. She stared. "What's this?" "My number." "In case you need rescuing again." Jessa bit back a smile. "You always carry business cards around with you at the ice rink," he shrugged. "You never know who you're going to crash into." She took the card and read it just his name, phone number, and a small, minimalist logo with the initials DTG. She didn't know what that stood for, but she wasn't about to ask. It felt weirdly formal. "Well, thanks for not letting me die of embarrassment today," she said, tucking the card into her coat pocket. Dean nodded once. "Don't be a stranger, Jessa Langley." She gave him a small wave and stepped out into the cold, not realizing until much later that night, lying in bed with hair still damp from her shower, that she hadn't asked him what he did, or why he was even skating alone on a Wednesday. She also didn't realize that the card in her coat belonged to the CEO and founder of Thatcher Global, a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire. But Dean Thatcher already knew who she was, and that changed everything. The next morning, Jessa was back at the cafe where she worked, pouring lattes for the early commuters and trying not to burn her fingers on the milk steamer. The hum of espresso machines filled the air, interrupted only by the occasional extra shot. "Or no foam, Jessa," called her manager, Maria, from the back. "Can you take the register for a bit on it?" She yanked off her apron and headed to the front. The bell over the door rang, and she automatically greeted the next person. "Welcome to Second Cup O." Dean stood there in a crisp charcoal coat, no scarf, no gloves, just him, looking completely out of place in the tiny cafe with its mismatched furniture and chalkboard menu. He smiled. "Hey," "What are you doing here?" she asked, startled. "I was in the neighborhood." "Uh-huh," she said, folding her arms. "You said you charge for skating rescues. I didn't realize you also made surprise appearances." "Technically, you owe me a hot chocolate," she blinked. He nodded toward the counter. "So." Still confused but oddly flattered, she grabbed a cup. "Whipped cream, obviously." She made it, handed it over, and tried not to notice how his fingers brushed hers. He took a sip and made an exaggeratedly pleased face. "Worth the trip," he said. "You walked all the way here for this," he shrugged. "I had a meeting nearby, thought I'd stop in." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you stalking me?" "No, but if I were, this would be the least creepy way to do it." She laughed again, shaking her head. "You're strange. And you're interesting." He said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal, but it felt like a big deal to her. No one ever called her interesting. Not since her last relationship ended in a crash-and-burn breakup that left her confidence in shreds. Not since she moved to this city trying to start over and mostly ended up feeling invisible. "So," he said, setting the cup on the counter, "would you want to get dinner sometime? Like a real one, not just hot chocolate in a paper cup." She blinked. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I don't know. I don't date random ice rink collisions." He tilted his head. But what if the collision wasn't random? Something about the way he said it made her stomach flip. After a long pause, she said, "Okay." "One dinner, Friday." Dean smiled, slow and confident. "Good, I'll pick you up." She watched him leave, still confused, still a little breathless. He didn't tell her where he'd take her. He didn't tell her he'd send a sleek black car with a driver on Friday night. And he definitely didn't tell her that the restaurant had a months-long waitlist, or that he owned half the block it sat on, but he would, eventually. Because Dean Thatcher didn't believe in luck, he believed in timing. And Jessa Langley had just skated straight into his. Friday arrived with a drizzling sky and nerves that hit Jessa like a slow-building storm. She'd changed outfits 3 times before finally settling on a navy wrap dress she hadn't worn since her cousin's rehearsal dinner last year. It was modest, but flattering, and the only thing in her closet that didn't scream, "I work in a coffee shop." At exactly 7, a sleek Blacktown car pulled up outside her building. She opened the door to find a uniformed driver already waiting with an umbrella. "You must be Miss Langley," he said with a polite nod. "Mr. Thatcher is expecting you." She climbed in, heart tapping against her ribs. The inside of the car smelled faintly of leather and something citrusy. The driver didn't make small talk, which she was grateful for. Her mind was already spinning with questions. She still didn't know what Dean actually did, only that he was clearly more polished and put together than anyone she'd dated before. When the car finally stopped, she peeked out the window and blinked. They weren't in front of some cozy bistro. They were at a building with a discreet awning and a brass-plated door flanked by 2 tall men in suits. Nothing about it looked casual. She stepped out hesitantly. The doorman opened the door without a word, and she was ushered inside a dimly lit lobby with marble floors and soft jazz curling through the air. A hostess greeted her by name before leading her through a velvet-curtained entrance into a dining room that looked more like a private club than any restaurant she'd ever seen. Dean stood as soon as he saw her. She hadn't expected him to be in a suit not like that. Tailored to perfection, dark blue with a crisp open collar shirt. No tie. Just enough to make him look devastatingly out of reach. "You found it," he said, stepping around the table to pull out her chair. "Unless I accidentally crashed a fundraiser for oil barons, yeah, I think I did," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "I figured you deserved a night off from paper cups and burnt espresso." She glanced around. "This place is—" "I know," he said. "I wasn't sure if it would be too much." "It is, but I kind of love it." He gave a small nod like he appreciated her honesty. A waiter appeared instantly, setting down chilled water and a bottle of wine that was already breathing. She leaned forward slightly. "So you still haven't told me what you actually do?" He poured the wine himself, ignoring the waiter's attempt to assist, and passed her a glass. "I run a company, real estate development. We specialize in restoring historic properties." That sounds huge. It's grown, he said simply. You own this restaurant. He didn't deny it. It was going to be torn down 5 years ago. I restored the building and kept the kitchen staff from the original place. Couldn't let the food disappear. Jessa stared at him. You're not just some guy who skates for fun, are you? I do skate for fun, he said. But no, I'm not just some guy. She sat back, processing. Is this why you didn't say anything earlier? Because you thought I'd act different? I didn't want you to decide what kind of man I am before I got the chance to show you. There was something honest about the way he said it. No arrogance, just quiet certainty. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream she didn't want to wake from. The food was unlike anything she'd tasted, delicate and rich, presented like art but satisfying in a way that made her close her eyes more than once. He didn't talk about money or power. He asked about her art degree, her old roommate who ran off to Italy, her favorite books. He listened without interruption, and when he talked, it was with intention, not filler. So if you could wake up tomorrow and do anything at all, what would it be? He asked as their dessert plates were cleared. She hesitated. I'd open a gallery, not a big one, just something local. Something that lets unknown artists stop being unknown. That's specific. I've had a lot of time to think about it. And what's stopping you? Money, confidence, the usual suspects. Dean didn't say anything right away. When he finally did, it wasn't condescending. You have a good eye. That mural series you posted 3 years ago. The one with the rusted fire escapes and painted shadows, her breath caught. How do you even know about that? I've read your blog, all of it. Jessa blinked. That blog has like 9 followers, 10 now. The air between them shifted. Not in a flashy, dramatic way, but in a way that felt undeniable. She wasn't just a curiosity to him. He'd done the work. He'd looked deeper when they left. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. The driver opened the door again, but this time Dean waved him off. Let's walk, he said. She didn't argue. They walked side by side, the silence between them not awkward, just full. At one point her heel caught in a crack in the pavement. She stumbled and his hand shot out to steady her. You okay? He asked, brow furrowed. I'm good, she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. His hand stayed on her lower back, gentle, not possessive. They stopped in front of her building. She turned to face him, unsure what to say. There was something about the way he looked at her like he was trying to memorize the moment. I had a good time tonight, she said. So did I. A pause stretched between them. I don't usually do this, she said. Neither do I. Before she could overthink it, he leaned in. His lips brushed her soft, certain, unhurried, not demanding, not performative, just present. When he pulled back, she was breathless. I'll call you, he said. She nodded, too stunned to reply. Only when she stepped inside her apartment did she realize she hadn't asked what DTG stood for, but part of her didn't want to know just yet. Tonight wasn't about titles or empires. It was about the way he looked at her like she was already more than she believed herself to be. Jessa hadn't expected to see Dean again so quickly. But on Monday morning, a courier arrived at the cafe with an envelope bearing her name in heavy calligraphy. Inside, she found a single ivory card with an embossed crest and a line handwritten in precise black ink. Thursday, 7 o'clock. Wear something you can dance in. She stared at it for a long moment, her apron dusted in flour from the morning's croissants, her thoughts spinning faster than the cappuccino frother. She hadn't told him she liked dancing. No one had ever asked, and yet somehow he already knew enough to offer it. By Thursday evening, she was standing in front of a historic hotel. She'd only ever walked past before its ironwork balconies and grand arched windows glowing with warm light. A doorman tipped his hat as he opened the door, and she stepped inside to find an opulent ballroom filled with soft music, crystal chandeliers, and more candlelight than seemed reasonable for a weeknight. A string quartet played near a corner of the room, their instruments lilting through a classic waltz as couples moved effortlessly across the polished marble floor. But it wasn't a party, no crowd, no clinking champagne flutes, just space, music, and Dean. He was waiting at the far end of the room, A tailored black suit and no tie again, sleeves rolled just enough to show the edge of a watch that probably cost more than her rent. He crossed the ballroom slowly, his eyes locked on hers. She didn't speak until he was close enough to hear her whisper. "You rented out a ballroom?" "I told you to wear something you could dance in," he said. "Didn't want to fight for space." She looked around. "There's no one else here." "Exactly," she hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Not since college." "Then I'll remind you." He extended his hand and she placed hers in it, hesitant at first, but the moment he pulled her gently toward him, something eased. His other hand settled at the small of her back, guiding her effortlessly into step. The music shifted into something slower, deeper, and they moved in time with it. She didn't think. She didn't need to. His lead was confident but never forceful, and for the first time in a long time she let herself be pulled, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to trust him. "How did you even find this place?" she asked quietly. "I restored it 8 years ago. It was about to be gutted for condos. I kept the original parquet flooring." She looked down at their reflection in the mirrored floor. "You keep saving things on the verge of disappearing. That's the goal." His voice dropped slightly. "Not everything deserves to be forgotten just because it's a little broken." The words caught her somewhere deep in the chest. They danced until the music faded into silence, until the air between them was heavier than before. He didn't rush to fill it. He let it stretch, as if he knew she needed space to come to her own conclusions. When they finally sat alone at a small table near the windows, she studied him under the flicker of candlelight. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone used to control. Someone who talks more about himself than anyone else. Someone who would try to impress me with numbers." "I could do that," he offered, "but I'd rather know why your hands shake a little when you're nervous." She blinked. "You notice that?" "I notice everything about you, Jessa." His tone wasn't flirtatious. It was deliberate, weighted. And it made her pulse quicken. She looked out the window, trying to steady herself. "You don't even know what you're getting into." "I know enough." "I come with mess," she said, turning back to him. "Not the kind you can clean up with money, the kind that lingers. That shows up in how I react when someone raises their voice, or how I freeze when I feel like I'm being cornered." He didn't flinch. "Then we'll move slower when we need to." "You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too." She studied him, trying to read between the lines. "Why me?" He leaned forward, hands folded on the table now. "Because you don't want anything from me, and because you look me in the eye like you expect me to be decent. That's rarer than you think." She didn't know what to say to that, so instead she asked, "What happened to you before this? Before you became the guy who owns entire buildings and dances in empty ballrooms?" Something flickered in his gaze, but he didn't look away. "My father walked out when I was 15, left behind a company on the edge of collapse and a mother who refused to sell it. She died when I was 20. I took what was left and rebuilt it from the ground up." She didn't speak. She just listened. "I worked 18-hour days, burned through friends, relationships, a few therapists. I got everything I thought I wanted. And then I realized I didn't know what it meant to have something that wasn't transactional." Her throat tightened. "You think this is different?" He looked at her like she was a question he'd been waiting years to answer. "Don't you?" She couldn't lie. "I think it could be." They didn't kiss again that night. He walked her to the car, opened the door, and didn't ask to come up. He just took her hand before she stepped inside and held it for a beat too long. "I'll call you tomorrow." She nodded. The car pulled away and she sat in silence, her fingers still tingling from the warmth of his touch. She didn't know what this was yet, but it wasn't ordinary, and that terrified her more than anything else. The wind off the river was sharp, but Jessa barely noticed as she climbed the steps to the gallery on West 28th. It was the first Saturday in March, and the city was just starting to thaw, but her nerves were frozen solid. She paused in front of the tall glass doors, heart pounding. Dean had asked her to meet him here. No explanation, no context, just a location and a time. Inside, the lights were dimmed except for a soft spotlight illuminating the center of the room. The space wasn't open to the public. No one milled about. There were no signs, no staff. Just silence and the faint scent of varnish and clean linen. She stepped in cautiously. Jessa. His voice echoed gently from behind her. She turned to find him standing near the far wall, his coat draped over a chair, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. But it wasn't the casual elegance that caught her breath, it was the canvas behind him. A massive painting, easily 6 feet wide, hung on the brick wall. Her painting. The one she'd submitted to an open call exhibit 2 years ago. The one that was dismissed with a form rejection letter. She hadn't seen it since she'd rolled it up and stored it in a cardboard tube under her bed. Her legs carried her forward without permission. Only when she stood in front of it did she realize that it wasn't just her old work, it had been restored, reframed, and displayed with a brass plaque carrying her full name. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Dean stepped closer. "I bought the building last year. It was going to be turned into a parking structure. The upper floor had been a gallery once. I uncovered the original architectural plans and restored it." "You said you do historic buildings," she murmured. "I do, but this one's different." She turned to face him. "You did this for me." "I didn't just do this for you," he said. "I did this because it should have never been buried, just like you." She blinked fast, her throat tight. "I reached out to the curator who rejected your submission," he continued, asked him why. He admitted he never looked at half the entries, said the show was already full. "I made sure he saw it this time." Her stomach twisted. "Dean, I didn't interfere, I didn't ask him to show it. I just gave him a second chance to not miss what was right in front of him." "Why would you go to all that trouble?" He stepped in, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. "Because I'm in love with you," her breath caught. "I don't know when it happened," he said. "Maybe it was the hot chocolate. Maybe it was watching you try to spin and nearly take out a child. I don't know, but I do know that you bring something into my life I didn't know I needed until you were already there." She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. "I've built a world full of elevators and penthouses and people who say yes to whatever I want," he continued. "But you challenge me, you call out my blind spots, you don't need me, and that's exactly why I need you." Tears stung her eyes. "Dean. I'm afraid, I know. What if I can't keep up with your world? Then I'll slow down. What if I fall apart? Then I'll help you rebuild. I don't want to be someone you fix." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not broken, you're just learning how to be seen. And I want to be the one who sees you, every day." Her arms slid around his waist before she could stop them. His breath hitched as he held her close, his chin resting lightly against her temple. "I love you too," she whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Say that again." She smiled through her tears. "I love you." His mouth found hers, tender at first, then deepening with the kind of certainty that only comes after doubt has been stripped away. There was no hesitation, no fear, just truth and the warmth of something earned. When they finally stepped back, he took her hand and led her to the far end of the gallery. A second canvas hung there, covered in black velvet. "Before we go," he said, "there's one more thing." He pulled the fabric down. It was a blueprint, but not of a building, of a space. A small, open floor plan with tall windows, exposed brick, and a brushed steel sign across the top. "Langley Studio." She stared, stunned. "It's yours," he said. "The lease is signed, the paperwork's in your name, it's not a gift, it's a seed. Something to start with. Something you'll grow." She turned to him, overwhelmed. "Dean, I don't want to be the reason you hesitate," he said. "I want to be the reason you leap." She didn't hesitate anymore, she leapt straight into his arms. A month later, the Langley Studio opened with its first full exhibit, featuring new artists from all over the city. Jessa stood in the center of the room in a soft linen dress, discussing brush techniques with a young painter from Queens. Her eyes sparkled with confidence, her laughter echoing off the gallery walls she now called her own. And standing in the corner, in a dark suit with his arms folded and an expression of quiet pride, was Dean. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't try to steal the spotlight. He just waited. When she finally crossed the room and reached for his hand, he brought her fingers to his lips and kissed them softly. She leaned in and whispered something that made his eyes soften. He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the crowd, and kissed her like the world could wait. Because it could. They had all the time in it now. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring when Jessa found herself barefoot on the rooftop terrace of Dean's penthouse, sunlight dancing across the skyline. The scent of fresh jasmine drifted from the planters along the railing, and the faint sound of jazz floated from the vintage record player inside. She stood by the edge, her hands resting lightly on the stone ledge, watching the clouds shift lazily over the city that had somehow become her home in every sense of the word. Dean stepped out onto the terrace holding 2 glasses of iced tea, sleeves rolled, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. He handed her a glass and leaned against the ledge beside her. "You've been quiet," he said. "I'm just thinking, dangerous." She looked over with a smile. "About how fast everything's changed, about how none of it feels temporary." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. She turned, curious, as he offered it to her. "What is this?" "Something I've been putting off," he said. "I wasn't sure when the right time would be, but then I realized there's no such thing." She opened it carefully. Inside was a legal document with her name at the top. She scanned the first few lines before her breath caught. "You made me a partner?" "You already are," he said. "I just made it official. The Langley studio is now a separate foundation under Thatcher Global. You'll manage it, direct it, grow it however you choose. No more worrying about rent or funding or permits. You have full autonomy." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Dean, this is real," he said. "Not because I want to impress you, because your vision deserves to last longer than 1 season." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. "You always do this. You make the ground feel solid again. You did that yourself." "I just gave you better shoes." She laughed, setting down her glass and stepping into his arms. He held her close, the kind of embrace that made the world blur around the edges. "I've never had a partner," she said against his chest. "Not like this. Not someone who lets me lead." "You don't need permission to lead, Jessa. You always have." He tilted her chin up and kissed her slow and sure, as if he knew exactly who she was and loved her more for it. When they parted, he reached for her hand and slid something into it, a small, vintage key. "What's this?" "The place in Hudson Valley I mentioned," he said. "There's a farmhouse there with a barn that's begging to be turned into a summer gallery. I thought maybe we could make it ours." She turned the key in her palm, the weight of it oddly symbolic. "You're really not afraid of anything, are you? Only losing the one thing that made everything else make sense." That night, they drove upstate under a sky that turned from gold to lavender. The roads were quiet, winding through fields that swayed in the evening breeze. They arrived just before dusk, the farmhouse nestled between tall trees and old stone walls. The barn stood sturdy and proud, its red paint faded, its doors thrown open to welcome possibility. Inside, the space smelled of sawdust and honeyed wood. Light filtered through the high windows in long golden beams. Jessa wandered through it slowly, her fingers trailing along the banisters, her heart swelling with a kind of peace she hadn't thought was possible. Dean watched her from the doorway, then walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I want to marry you," he said. She turned in his arms. "I haven't asked yet," he added, "because I didn't want it to feel like a culmination. I want it to feel like a beginning." Her voice broke slightly. "Then ask." He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He pulled out a ring that sparkled faintly in the barn's warm light, simple, elegant, understated like her. "Jessa Langley, will you marry me, build a life with me, and keep challenging me until I'm old and gray and grumpier than I already am?" She laughed through the tears. "Yes. Absolutely yes." They spent the night there, curled up on an old quilt in the empty barn, the stars overhead like silent witnesses. By summer, the gallery in Hudson Valley opened with a full roster of local artists, each one handpicked by Jessa. The community came in droves, drawn by the art, the story, the warmth of the woman who never let her past define her. Dean stayed mostly behind the scenes by choice, content to be the man who helped build the stage and watched her shine. Their wedding took place in the same barn, now transformed with string lights, wildflowers, and rows of wooden benches filled with friends, artists, and strangers who'd become family. Jessa walked down the aisle barefoot, a crown of jasmine in her hair, her smile radiant. Dean waited for her at the altar, no tux, just a linen shirt and the look of a man who knew he'd found his forever. They exchanged vows they wrote themselves, promises rooted not in fairy tales but in reality, in showing up, in listening, in choosing each other every day. Afterward, they danced under the stars, surrounded by laughter and music, their hands never letting go. Years passed. The Hudson Valley Gallery expanded to include artist residencies, workshops, and community projects. Jessa's name became synonymous with integrity and vision in the art world. Dean continued to develop properties across the globe, but he made it clear this was home. They never stopped dancing. In living rooms, on rooftops, on quiet streets when no one was watching. They found joy in the ordinary, magic in the mundane, and every anniversary, Dean gave her a new key. To a house, a gallery, a memory, but the one she wore around her neck always was the first, the key to the life she never expected, and the man who gave her everything without ever asking her to change.